Hi, I'm Levi, and this is Not About You. Not About You is a podcast about identity and social justice. I'm the producer and host of the show, and I wanted to make something where a white, straight, cis-gendered man, that's me, connected with folks with different lived experiences from my own about the ways parts of their identities bump up against injustices. We talked about race, gender, religion, representation, protests, politics, relationships, and more. I'm putting out 10 episodes as a first season of the show. I'll put out 5, and then a week or so later I'll put out another 5. While they'll be numbered 1 through 10, you can certainly listen to any or all of them in whatever order you choose. Each of these conversations was recorded from late August of 2016 into mid-October of 2016, before the 2016 presidential election. My hope is that this series leads to more conversation and interaction. I want folks who are hesitant or new to standing in these struggles to feel more comfortable showing up for change and asking questions. I want underrepresented voices to have new ways to be amplified and supported. I've set up a voicemail line, 612-361-9261, where you can share comments, suggestions, and personal stories of your own that may be used in future episodes of this show. If you tell me which episode you're responding to, that will help me make follow-up episodes with voicemail responses. Call 612-361-9261 with your questions, comments, or stories. And other than that, you can respond on all the social media channels. I hope you'll listen with an open mind and an open heart. I know I've made a lot of mistakes in these conversations, and I'll make more to come. And I welcome you to join me as I try to learn and grow. This is Not About You.
My name is Noel Nix. I live in St. Paul with my wife. For my day job, I work as the aide to a Ramsey County commissioner, but outside of that, really think of myself as a community development professional. So engage in a lot of work and advocacy around neighborhood improvement, economic development, affordable housing, and a lot of stuff in between. That is a lot of what my portfolio and my day job is around as well, but would add topics of family support, juvenile justice, and workforce development. So a couple things.
Yeah, that's a lot. And then, how do you think of yourself as far as identity?
I am a black man.
Perfect. Nice. Well, so I appreciate you talking to me, and I certainly have a lot of different things I would love to address with you, but I know one of the things you mentioned, what do people say?
So let me lay the scene and provide a little bit of
paint
context.
a picture.
Yeah, so I grew up in Flint, Michigan during the 80s and the 90s. This is sort of right around like the pre-NAFTA, post, Cold War industrial decline, right? So the sort of the creation of the Rust Belt. And I think it was President Carter who used the term Rust Belt actually to sort of describe cities like Flint. So, grew up in a middle-class family. My parents were divorced, but were both very active in my life. So my mom, an attorney who worked for the local auto union for a number of years, but then went into the public sector. And then a dad who was a community organizer for the Catholic Church for a number of years. So, grew up in sort of a very civically engaged, intellectual family, right? And my dad went to Catholic school, so by God, in Toledo, Ohio, where he grew up, so by God, his son was going to go to Catholic school too. And so my parents worked really hard and sacrificed so I could go to Catholic school, kindergarten or pre-K, daycare even, through high school. And so I went to a really diverse elementary school. So even though it's a local Catholic school, extremely diverse. I think in my 8th grade class there were 24 of us. Predominantly white, but Asian, Latino, African American, right? So so folks from all different sort of walks in an interesting cross-section of the city. Working class families, doctors, right? So folks who worked at the local auto plant. So to me, like in some ways, I grew up in this sort of what I thought reflected sort of a microcosm of America, right? Where we all look different and come from different spaces, but we come together and by and large got along. And so it was in high school, Catholic high school, which was much larger than, so I think in my freshman class there were a couple hundred of us. So I'm in like honors English, and this is like the honors. So like I had to like take an admission test to get into this set of classes. My English teacher says to me, she looks at me kind of funny and says, I just have really, so I'm the only African American in this class of like 30, right? And this is like the top tier of kids academically within my high school. I'm really, she says to me, I'm just really happy to know you, right? Like you give me such a sense of hope. And my husband, he teaches at a local public school, and his experience with his students is just so different than my experience with you, and you just give me hope, Noel. And here I am. How old is somebody a freshman year? Like 12?
12, yeah, 12, 13.
What, I don't know what to thank you.
Yeah.
So fast forward.
Did you remember? Did you know what she was talking about? For each of these 10 episodes of Not About You, I put out requests for folks to call in with responses to questions that come up in each episode. So a few people left voicemails, and I'll be sharing some of those in the middle of some of these conversations. You have reached the Not About You voicemail line. Leave a message after the tone.
Hey, this is Rashawn Collins, actually responding to the You're One of the Good Ones quotes that I was responding to via Noel Nix. I just wanted to be able to give my piece on it. As somebody that I guess you could say has an ambiguous race, or I guess identity or ethnicity, because I am mixed, I'm black and white. Sometimes I always get two sides of each story, and even worse, I might even hear the worst part of the story because they assume I am not of that race. So I have plenty of times where I've been told, about the N-words, or, they're coming to take over, or, whatever racial epithets people want to use, and scare tactics, I guess, or I guess fears. And then later in the story, I try to explain to them that I am one of those people that they actually were just referencing, and to see how fast their face gets read. I think the issue right now in our community, and before any of all the stuff that happened, is that people don't understand the empathy, and they don't understand the words that they're using and how it could affect somebody. Asking somebody to touch their hair makes them feel like a showpiece, a museum artifact. Telling somebody that you assume that they should be able to speak Spanish if their last name is Hernandez. Even my wife is Puerto Rican, and plenty of times with her last name being Collins, plenty of time people don't assume she's Hispanic, but the minute she talks or finds out her first name, then they want to start speaking to her in Spanish. She'll stop them mid-conversation, tell them, I don't want to speak Spanish. I'm in America and I can speak Spanish, but I don't want to at this time. And I think this points to where we are, is that people assume so much but can't step inside somebody else's role. I'm not sure when or how I'll ever see this or hear about it, but I just want to make sure I get my piece of that. We all got to be able to look at somebody else inside somebody else's shoes. And just because someone's a white male doesn't mean he's just a white male. Maybe he's from Scotland, or maybe he's from England, or just assuming because I have curly hair doesn't mean I'm black at all. Actually, I could be Puerto Rican, I could be Caribbean, I could be African from South Africa for all you know. So hopefully this gets used, and I look forward to hearing from y'all at some point. Thanks, bye.
Hey, Levi, it's Taj, and I'm just calling because I saw your post on Facebook about being when's the time of being told that you're not like other people of color, and you're one of the good ones. Again, I've been told a lot actually by a bunch of people that you're not like other people of color because most people don't even know I'm a person of color, and when I say it, they honestly look shocked. Or they'll be like, oh, but you're Jewish, which doesn't make sense to me at all because, yes, that's my heritage, but also not the part of being the person of color I'm referring to. But yeah, so a lot of times, like other people of color, it feels like it's because I'm not, to be 100% honest, because I'm not black, or being the good ones, or as my agents, in the past, one of my agents that I'm no longer with said I was a safe choice, or one of the good ones kind of deal. Basically meaning that I'm not black is what it felt like it implied to me, which is the worst. And also frustrating when people don't believe that I'm a person of color and that's how I identify, just because it doesn't seem like I am because my skin tone happens to be pretty light. Or fair, on the fair side. Anyway, this has gotten rambly. I hope that answers your question. I'm excited for this project. It looks really cool. Okay, bye.
Hey there, Patrick Roan here, giving a call. Yes, that has happened to me many times throughout my life, being a, fairly well-educated, coming from a well-educated family, light skin. I often say that I'm one of the rare black males that actually benefit from white privilege, because I'm just not often recognized as being African American. And a lot of people forget that I am, especially those people who know me close. It just kind of like never occurs to them. Oh yeah, that's right. You're a black guy. We forget that. Yes, it has been often the case throughout my life, especially as a kid. I would be hanging out with my white friends, and a joke would slip out, or a comment, or the N-word, and it would always be, "Oh, but we don't mean you. You're different." And I would have to kind of parse that and deal with it and recognize that there, probably is, some racism there, and probably the best thing that I could do actually is to stay engaged with those folks, to remind them that, not all black people, or not black people in general, are not stereotyped in such a way, as it were. So, there you go. Thanks. Bye.
Now let's get back to the conversation. Did you remember? Did you know what she was talking about?
I think I had an idea of what she meant. Mm-hmm. All I could pick up, right, is that you're telling me I'm not like, somebody else, right? And, so I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe she just means I'm a good kid. Maybe she means I'm doing well in school, right? So here I am, I'm already in sort of like this rarefied atmosphere, right, where 30 kids, like self-selected into honors, because you took a test to be there, only black kid, right? And I'm not the only black kid in my school. Like, the school's like maybe 10% black. So, so I'm not like the only black kid who's walking through the halls, and it's not the only English class she teaches, right? But, but so for whatever reason, she felt the need to say that to me. But it left me feeling uneasy, right? It left me feeling like, does this mean there's something wrong with me? Or does it mean that there's something wrong with everyone else who she's encountered, and I'm a standout from that? And if either way, it's like, is that what I want? Is that who I want to be? Is that, this 12-year-old who, all the questions you ask yourself when you're 12? And it didn't feel good, and it was one of those awkward moments where you can tell someone's trying to tell you something that is supposed to make you feel good, and it doesn't leave you feeling good, which I think in the spectrum of human interaction, that can be one of the most awkward and disturbing types of interactions that we can have.
Yeah, because you don't really know what to do with it.
Right.
To that person, but even for yourself.
Right, because you're thinking about their intent, right? Yeah. And the fact that, it's a white elephant gift, right? They think that this is so great. And you're here thinking, I don't know that I want this, and I don't know what I'm going to do with this, right? And how do I get rid of this? Right?
Well, so that articulation of that kind of thing where someone's telling you something and they think it's a nice compliment.
Yeah.
The interesting part to me is that she felt compelled to share that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure plenty of people have thoughts like that.
Mm-hmm.
but it's a weird thing that there's a certain group of people, and I will say a lot of liberal white people, who feel like I should share this thought rather than that can just stay in your head. So I'm curious how often then and even now you find yourself dealing with that kind of space where someone is telling you something that you know the intentions might be good, but they're just wildly missing the mark.
So I'll fast forward to another, and I'll get there. So, but I want to share another experience that happened. Fast forward 4 years. I've moved to Minnesota. Came to Minnesota, to the University of Minnesota sight unseen. I just knew I wanted to be out of Michigan, and the Twin Cities was close. I wanted to go to an urban campus, right, in a city, and so found myself at the University of Minnesota, and a couple experiences actually.
And did you continue throughout high school to excel academically?
Yeah. So graduated in the top 10% of my class. Yeah, did well.
So that kind of thing didn't put you off?
No. So I came from a family background where academic achievement is this is what we do, right? I mean, not just my immediate family, right, but aunts, uncles, cousins. So came from an expectation of excellence in that regard. And so had an experience where, so this is at orientation. I'd never been to Minnesota before, and so someone's leading us through this exercise at Willie Hall, which is the big lecture hall on the West Bank of the University of Minnesota. There's probably a few hundred of us at least in there, and the woman's like, introduce yourself to the person next to you, and share a little bit about yourself. And I'm sitting next to this middle-aged white guy wearing a trucker hat, arms folded, beard. You think about what Minneapolis looks like with glass skyscrapers and buses and everything. So it looks a little like a fish out of water, right? And so, and arms folded, so he's clearly uncomfortable and doesn't want to talk to anyone. I presume maybe his daughter's having, it's in the class or something, in the incoming class. And, I share, hey, my name's Noel, I'm from Michigan, kind of give my spiel, and he's like, oh, what part of Michigan? And I'm like, Flint, just north of Detroit. He's like, oh, is that Upper Peninsula or Lower Peninsula? I'm like, oh, that's Lower Peninsula. He's like, yeah, you sure don't look like anybody I know from the Upper Peninsula. And so I'm like, I've been in Minnesota for 24 hours. Right? And so this starts to, you don't fit into this box that I have, right? Or this is how you fit into this box that I have when it comes to what I think of black people. I think of this, right? Or black Michiganders. This is who I think of. And so fast forward a year from that, I'm on a road trip with several white friends to Chicago. So, 7-8 hour drive to Chicago during spring break. And, you do a lot of talking. And my friend who is from suburban Milwaukee, we're just sort of chatting, and, she looks at me, she's driving, and she kind of looks over at me, and, we're driving through the hills of Wisconsin, and she's like, yeah, you're not like any black person I've met before. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? You're just different. You're different. And again, so that took me back to this space when I was 12, right? And it's like, here's this notion again.
And this is a friend of yours.
Yeah, right? This is someone who, I've probably been at that point friends maybe half a year with, and, we've hung out and had meals together, right? And again, I'm not the only black person at the University of Minnesota, right? We're talking 60,000 students, right? And so, and I think I just kind of tried to find a way to change the subject or something, right? And because that notion just bothered me.
Yeah.
That, so what does she think a black person is supposed to be, right? What imagery is in her mind, right, that I don't line up with? And well, interestingly enough, on that same trip, we stopped through Milwaukee. We crashed a night at her folks' place, right? So I got to see the very nice suburban community where she grew up, very nice house, father who's like a senior leader at a local corporation. And so, I'm like, well, how many black people has she even met?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like...
What's her sample size?
Exactly. So is she basing this off of like just what she sees on TV? And, I regret that we never really had that conversation because at this point, 19, 20, and like, I just,
It's a lot to unpack. And
yeah.
You're going to be stuck in the car.
Yeah. Like, I'm just going to Chicago.
Yeah.
I just want some Chicago-style pizza and, maybe go up and, like, the Sears, I just wasn't prepared for that. And, I think maybe you never are. Maybe it is just how you respond to the world around you and, these questions and expectations, right? So in hindsight, right, I think what challenges me, what bothers me is that, and I kind of said this earlier, but you have this box, right? And I either fit in this box or I don't fit in this box. And it feels, it's a sad experience to feel like somebody has a low or a difference or some sort of opinion of everyone who looks like you, and they're looking to see if you line up with that. And if you don't, you earn this awkward compliment. Congratulations, you're not what I expected.
Part of that, and this might be not true, but it feels like it also minimizes your accomplishments because they're like, hey, I have a very low bar for people who look like you, and you've exceeded that level of expectations. Rather than you just being...
Well, I mean, not just accomplishments, but my humanity,
yeah.
Right? Like, so, so that means that you had this expectation in your head, right? Like when you met me, and only through the course of time have I been able to somehow countervail, right, or surpass that expectation, right? And so I think that's where that bar is low.
Well,
right?
It took her 1.5 years for you to get out of that box.
Right. And so here's the what's wrong with that is that I would, and again, like I miss the fact that I didn't get to have this conversation with her, and I would almost love to just pick up the phone and say, hey, do you remember this? She probably doesn't even remember.
Nope.
So I won't call her and say, hey, remember this like 15 years ago?
All I ask if you do is please record it.
Oh, you're right. By the way, you're being recorded, and you haven't heard from me in like 10 years. but what bothers me is that, well, okay, there's two sides to it, right? Like one, what even formed her opinion, right? Yeah. So is there a lack of life experience or life experience, or, like was she afraid of me until she knew me? What did she even mean, right? Like, and maybe it's not as bad as I even thought it was, right? But short of that information, like all I can go is to the worst case scenario. And so that's why I would love to go back and have that conversation. Like, what did you mean, right? Like, what do you expect? Right. Like, what do you think black people are like?
What is every other black person you know like? Because that's what you said. You're not like other black people I know.
Right. Is it just the person that you see on the street corner?
Right.
Is it the person that you see in, the rap video? Is it, so there's so many notions of class and prejudice and all this stuff like wrapped up into that. And again, like I don't know for sure what the image she had in her mind, but but when someone's saying that to you, right? Like I don't think she was trying to insult me, right? So this wasn't like a conversation where I felt like, like she was expressing disappointment, right? So I'm just, based off of the context and the tenor of the conversation, right, it feels like she's saying like, down here is what I expected and what, what I think of black people, but hey, you're up here. You're not like, right?
You haven't stolen my car this whole trip.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So
well, there's a piece to that doesn't sound like this would even cross your mind still. But my first thought when you described that and her saying, you're not like any other black people I know, my impulse is like, well, based on that, you're like every other white person I know. Like you just went to a suburban family's house.
Yeah.
She doesn't know a lot of people of color, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's like a lot of white people.
Yeah.
So she's much more of a stereotype than you are, is what has happened in that exchange. But that's just me turning it into a...
Yeah, I mean, maybe so, right? And maybe... So... to the extent that, that there's a bunch of white people out there who have that experience, right, who, have their black friend and, it opens their eyes, then yeah, that's, I think it points to an underlying issue, right?
Well, so I don't know if you can articulate around this, but do you have thoughts around why a white person has the desire to tell their, often new black friend how unique they are, or how they're not like they expected? Like the fact that you have several of those experiences you can point to, and I'm sure that's not uncommon. There's a lot of work to be done to change that thought. That is this idea built up on probably a lot of popular culture.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about a lack of awareness, because you earlier said it takes away your humanity. I think if anyone knew they were doing a thing, not anyone, but I think if a lot of people knew that they could say something that would make someone feel like their humanity was taken away, they would try to look at why they think that and definitely not say it. So I wonder if you have thoughts about why there's this desire to tell you, instead of just like, hey, I'm enjoying talking to you, it has to become, you're a racial surprise, and isn't that nice?
I think that, I will say this. One, I think we're all susceptible to that, right? And to that notion and building up ideas or falsehoods or caricatures in our mind, like what people from a people group are like, and then being disabused to that notion through interpersonal relationships. So, I will say that I don't think that this is a uniquely white issue, but it presents an issue in a racialized society, right? Or a society that's built on past, and current and perpetuating patterns of privilege.
So generous of you to do it that way. We all have this.
I work in politics.
Yes,
I live in a world of nuance. I think that if you haven't been exposed to, if you haven't had the awesome experience of having a friend from a different culture who can tell you about their experience in that culture and what it means to them to be black or to be gay or to be, right, then, I think it's very easy to take the mental shortcut to say to be blank is to be, this, that, and the other, right? And then, you have this epiphany at some point, right, in the midst of a relationship that later disabuses you of those notions that, oh, I guess it's not like that, right? And so, but this person's experience, or this person doesn't line up with this, that, and the other that I thought, I commonly attribute to this group. So, yeah, you're different, right? So... And what's wrong with that is and why that takes away someone's humanity is because, no, you're an individual, right? And we're all multi-layered and complex beings, with all our flaws and all our perfections and all our, crabbiness and goodness. And being black is a big part of who I am and how I identify, right? And there's a whole journey that I had to go on to really come to terms and come to peace with what that meant for me. And I think most of us who are self-aware do go through that journey. Now, I think that what happens though is like when you're to be white, right, is to be normalized within American society, right? So in a way, right, like you get access to, a group that's supposed to be somewhat, they're this, that, and the other and homogenous in a certain set of ways, even though I don't think people who are white necessarily think of themselves that way, right? Like, I think most people don't go around thinking about the fact, oh yeah, I'm white, right? But they think of themselves as Levi or as Kristen or as whoever.
Individuals.
Exactly.
I wanted to let you keep going and saying white names, though.
Oh, I got a ton.
Kyle. Mandy. What else?
So you rob someone of that same privilege to be an individual, right? To be, and this kind of goes to, how do you identify? Yeah, I'm a black man. Now you can unpack that, and there's a lot that's in there, and it's going to look different from the next person. But to say like you're not like all those other people I know who look like you or come from the same place as you or identify the way you identify, it means that you're not even starting at a base level where, you're thinking of me as an individual. You're thinking of me just as a black person.
Yeah.
Right? And, everything else builds out from there. And, when our impressions or our preconceived notions of people are informed by, the darker demons of our nature, that's a problem, right? That's like, the clutching the purse in the dark alley, right, type of problem. And so I that's a long answer to your question, but I think that's where that comes from. Like, we all kind of do it, but, I think that it's troublesome when it comes from a place of privilege, and it comes from a place of, you give yourself the gift, right, and get to walk in the privilege of being an individual, but everyone else is part of a group.
I wonder if for you, earlier you said every time some version of that phrase or question is put to you, every time you are caught off guard by it. And I wonder if you preferred that, or does something happen where eventually a lot of people live in the space where they come to expect it, and then maybe it makes you less open to connections with people? Like, you being still surprised by it means you still haven't sort of developed the skin where you're like, someone's about to tell me that I'm not like anyone else, like I'm not what they expected.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to unpack that sort of a different way. I think where that becomes problematic, where it does become problematic is, when you hear that over and over again, it sort of lays a jelly bean trail where, you may be tempted, as a person of color to think, oh yeah, I am different. Oh yeah, I'm special, right? Like, I'm not like, like those people, and so I think the danger is to feel like you've reached a place of acceptance within white society that, in one way means that, like, everyone's accepted and racism isn't an issue, right? And I'm a person of color and, I don't experience racism, therefore racism must not exist, right? Because, I've been told I'm special and I'm, right? Or it becomes like a victim blaming thing, like, oh, if those people over there, right, if other black people would just do X, Y, and Z, right, then they would gain acceptance within society, right? And we all hear it before, if you just pull up your pants and cut your hair and, dress and act a certain way, right? If you act respectable, you'll get respect, right? And, and we hear black people say this, right? Or it's, so there's this separation, right, from the broader us, right, who fall within the spectrum of a shared identity, right? The Raven Simone, like, oh yeah, I'm not black, I'm just Raven, right?
So Raven.
Right, no, it's so Raven. Not to say that to be, to be a person of color, to be black, is to have to always do the solidarity thing, which I think that there's particular reasons to do that, right? And I think that there's good reasons to do that, but you don't have to lose your individuality in the midst of that. And so I think that, some embrace of that is to try to embrace a sense of individuality. I think some of it's to try to have a sense of agency.
You're going to be put in a box anyways, you might as well try and own which box.
Or disown the box, right?
Right.
To conscientiously say, like, I'm going to dress this way and talk this way and do this, right? So folks don't think I'm that, right? Because, folks over there, right? Like, they get pulled over by the police. They don't get the job. They don't, right? Like, where that's problematic, right, is that we dissociate ourselves from the bigger issue at hand, right? It's that we have to follow these unwritten rules of the road to gain access and privilege, and right. And so, regardless of whether or not you agree that like what respectability looks like, maybe folks should not sag and cut their hair and dress a certain way, right? But my humanity doesn't come from the fact that whether or not I do that. No matter how you look, no matter how you choose to express yourself, you have value, right? Then that's the corrosive nature of the, hey, you're not like those people, right? You're not like other people who look like you. So it's robbing you of your humanity because your humanity, your worth is being cleaved from everyone else who looks like you, right? And so there's I never thought of it. There's something genocidal about that, right? That I think is why I found it deeply unsettling at 12, right? And I had to go on an intellectual journey and live some more life, right? To understand, like, oh, this feels icky. Yeah. And, only now, like in my mid-30s, can I look back and say, oh, yeah, that was why.
Yeah, that would unsettle a 12-year-old. Yeah. Well, a couple of things you touched on that I'd be curious to hear about is, so you are in politics.
Yeah.
And you are, like, very educated, and I've seen you sort of in very networky situations. Like, you are great at connecting with people. You're great at making people feel comfortable. And so there's this thing about, like, code switching, about, like, I'm this way in this place and that one in that place. And, like, frankly, my own personal experience, I'm different with my family than I am with work colleagues, than I am with my creative colleagues.
Right.
Like, I have my own little tiny bits of code switching all the time. I think everyone does.
Right.
But I do wonder if you have experiences still where you're a black man, and it's pretty hard to keep a secret right now about how black men are viewed by some big structural pieces of society.
Yeah.
So you're in these sort of political spaces.
Yep.
Are you feeling othered all the time? Are you feeling like is there some degree of no matter what level you get to, what work you're engaged in, you still don't get to be at the level you've worked to get to because of your outward appearance?
I think what's challenging is, I'm going to keep using that phrase because it's a challenging conversation, I guess, but I think what I experience and when I talk to others, other black professionals, so whether it's we work in politics or corporate or the nonprofit sector, because everywhere has politics with a small p, right? You learn those, the folks who are most successful are those who learn those unwritten rules of the game, and I think that's where code switching comes in, certain ways of dress, right? Certain ways to manage and handle conflict. And I think that there's a hyper consciousness that comes with that. Or I think it was W.B. Du Bois who talked about the double consciousness. So like seeing America through a veil, as it ought to be and as it is.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be.
That kind of hyper awareness.
And I think that where it's challenging in politics with a capital P, right? So, and I think of myself as working the intersection of politics and policy. And politics is the who and the how, right? Policy is the what. Like, what are we going to do, right? About what we all agree on as a problem, or enough of us agree on as a problem. And I think where that's challenging is you look at something like Philando Castile, here locally, and how do I deal with the big P politics and the small p politics of being a black guy working in politics and policy, which is still a largely, locally white-dominated field, and bring my full self to that work and work for justice and for a better society and for a society where that doesn't happen. And at the same time, recognize that it's not like jumping from point A to point B, it's jumping from point A to point Z, right? And there's these rules of the road to get there. And, I think advocates are saying like, well, to hell with the rules, right? The rules are what got us here. And the thing is that there's always rules, right? So there are things that, that we've built up and processes and stuff that's frustrating and inefficient. But if we tore this all down and built something else tomorrow, right, there'd still be politics with a small p. And I guess that's how I sleep at night, is recognizing that. I'm being very candid with you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm being very candid with you, Internet.
Yeah.
Being very candid with you, listener.
Keep that in mind.
So there's always going to be rules and structures, and everything that I do is geared towards trying to make sure that we're building something better and building something where, needless injustice doesn't happen. And I think that the trick of it all is not losing yourself in the midst of the work, not losing a sense of self, a sense of groundedness. And unfortunately, that's what starts to, the groundwork is laid for that, for losing that groundedness or not even achieving that groundedness when you tell a 12-year-old, hey, you're not like, other black people, right? So for me, my journey was wrestling with and trying to become more conscientious of what does it mean to be black, right? And I had parents who did that, right, and encouraged that, and through like Black History Month and family stories, and again, I came from a family that was really civically involved and had a lot of civic agency where I grew up. So I tried to continue that, in my 20s. I took a Black history class, 1865 to present, right? And I took that class, and all of a sudden, right, like a couple things happened. One, I got really angry for a while because it's like, oh, that's why this stuff is like this? That's why, like, really? Really? And two, by learning about, and I think everyone would benefit from taking a class like that, because by learning about Black scientists, like George Washington Carver, Black performing artists, right, who span the spectrum of the creative arts, from Paul Robeson, right, who was an opera singer, to Marvin Gaye, to Black poets and Black intellectuals, right? I'm like, oh, wow, there's all different ways of being Black and doing Black, right? And I don't have to put myself in a box, and therefore I don't have to let anyone else put me in a box, right? Whether it's my freshman high school teacher or, my hurtful but well-meaning friend, or, right, it's another Black person telling me like, oh, well, Black people don't ski. Yeah. What are you doing, right? Or Black people don't do that. It's like, since when, right? Have you heard of so-and-so, right? Yeah. And so it would be great if we lived in a society, and we wouldn't be great. We need to live in a society where we all appreciate the fullness of every single culture and the fullness of expression that exists within every single culture as it's manifested through each individual exploring their humanity and their race, their culture, right? Because even let's be clear that the idea of race is a social construct.
Absolutely. And
yes, culture is a social construct too, but culture is based on shared experience, history, geography, right? Like race is just strictly phenotypical, right? Like yes and no, right? So, because interestingly enough, right, it's like, oh, you may think that I'm white until I speak with a thick Chaldean accent, right? And whoa, right? And there's even histories of, I think there was a Supreme Court case, right, where you had, I want to say it was Japanese woman, right, Japanese American woman who, she said, oh, I'm white, right? Like, look at my skin. Mm-hmm. I'm white, right? I should get access to privilege, right? And so that's when I say it's like a socially defined, right? Totally. The thing is it's a socio-political construct, not strictly a social construct. There's documented Supreme Court cases and laws, right, that help us shape what whiteness is.
Yeah, there's systems created around that.
Absolutely, right? Like you can see like the track record, the trail of how we made this thing up as we went along, right? And tried to shut off the passageways and the gates into what whiteness is, right?
Which means we can unmake it or remake it.
Right.
The fact that we've built it.
Whereas culture, right, so being a part of Black culture, right, being of the African diaspora and, who raised in the Midwest of the United States, I'm grounded in something, in a common in a shared expression of a common humanity that's influenced by the place and time and the unique biological nature of who I am, right? Mm-hmm. I oftentimes, call myself, like when I'm posting on Facebook, so I'm a blurred, I'm a Black nerd. It was in college where I really started to embrace, like I can be a nerd and I can be Black.
And that's like a thing now.
Right.
It wasn't
right. Because I can remember being teased by other Black kids in elementary school because I listened to movie soundtracks and classical music. It's like, Black people don't listen to classical music. And I think, we're fortunate that we live in a time now where we are lifting up more examples of Black expression and just expression within cultures across the spectrum. But, we still have this box, and, we still inflict these boxes on each other, whether it be from a place of privilege or a place of inflicting privilege or acquiescing, to the privilege structure of society.
And it feels like part of that, holding on to that by the people in power, big picture people in power, is this idea of scarcity rather than abundance.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people have a thing where, if every culture is fully represented, that somehow detracts from my culture being represented, rather than it just adding to the richness of the thing.
Yeah,
I don't know how to build that out.
Well, and I think that that's sort of, yes, and I think that's built on a foundation of taking shortcuts, and part of the expression of privilege being like, let's find someone to speak for those people. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's
easier.
Yeah, so I think that's where I still, even though, I haven't been told in a while, you're not like other Black people, right? Because I think grown-ups have a little, grown-ups, the first person who told me that. I think that we live in a different time, a slightly different time.
People know to be ashamed.
Yeah, exactly. Some people. I think that we, in any organization, we kind of do that. We tokenize, right? I think tokenizing and tokenization is the close cousin of, you're not like those people. So let me find someone who I can relate to and talk to, and, who can tell me what Black people think.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that's it. That's settled.
Yeah.
I'm doing that to you right now.
Right, exactly, right? Congratulations, Black America. I'm your representative to Levi Weinhagen.
It's my fault, though. I picked it.
I know, right? I apologize. So we do that, right, within organizations. My first job was in corporate, coming out of school, right? And I worked in corporate marketing. And so we think, no, what do you think Black people are going to think about this, right? This is what I think. Right. I can't tell you if that's what all Black people are going to think. In fact, I can assure you that not every single Black person is going to think, right? And so, that's how we perpetuate that. And that's sort of I think the more common expression of that is sort of that, let's bring someone in here and, have them talk to us about, right? And so just the notion that, that these other groups, that minority groups, have to have a designated spokesperson or representative, right? No one who speaks for white America, right? If that's truly a group, and it's not just a collection of individuals, right, who get to, get the common shelter under a certain privileges. Who speaks for them, right? Is it the President of the United States? No. Well, hey, look, the President's a Black guy now.
And everyone took that fine.
Right, just fine. Great, just another day in America. But or is it, is it Bill O'Reilly? Is it, right? Is it Rush Limbaugh? Or no, so who speaks for white America, right? And the answer is we don't inflict that expectation on the majority, on white America, right? Because we think, many people would say that's a ludicrous notion. Who's going to speak on behalf of millions and millions of people and represent all their views? So it goes with people of color, right, and other quote-unquote minority groups within the United States. One person, a handful of people.
Al Sharpton, right?
Right, exactly, right? Just call up Al, right? Or and give him a TV show on MSNBC, and he can tell us what the Black people think, right? So,
that is literally what happens.
It is, yeah. Right? And it's wrong on so many different levels. Yeah. Because there are times where, there are people who claim that they're speaking on behalf of Black America, and it's I don't believe that. And, and it could be on the left and on the right, right? It could be across whatever spectrum. It's because I'm an individual. Part of my identity is wrapped up in this thing that we call Blackness. And that's just one aspect of who I am. And oh, by the way, because that's one aspect of who I am, there's not a box that you can fit that in. So, one, don't try to put that aspect of me within a box. And two, don't try to fit all of me into that box because you're missing out on the full picture, the big picture, all who I am and I've been created to be. So don't abuse me in that way, right? And don't sell yourself short or miss out because the shortcut is Noel's that black guy who works at Ramsey County, right? Mm-hmm. We all lose when we do that.
Do you have ways you think about privilege in your own life? Yeah,
so I think I am really aware of the fact that I grew up in a family that was just really civically aware, right?
You had a community organizing.
Yeah, so I had a dad who led anti-drug marches, and a mom who, right? So like the local political candidates launched, had conversations with my parents before they ran for office, mm-hmm. right? So there's sort of a normalcy to the world of politics that we live in that I think is, even though my political awakening was later, right, in my own individual political awakening, I had a shorthand. I knew some of the rules of the road. I had people I could call, right, to help me understand the world, who were as close as my parents to help me figure that out. And not everybody has that. So, when we think about the struggle to create a more just and fair society, I have to remind myself, everybody didn't grow up like you in that way, mm-hmm. right? Where, of course, this makes sense and this is how you do things, right? Because that's how it's done. Whereas, something like medicine or accounting, right, or real estate, whatever whatever the family trade was, sure, that gives you an inside track, right? But those careers certainly have wide-ranging impact, but arguably politics impacts all of us, right? And policy impacts all of us. And so I'm mindful that I grew up, where the family business was getting involved in the community and being a part of change, and not everybody had that.
Yeah, that's great. You know how the mechanisms all work.
Yeah, so I try to be open and share, and anytime someone calls me or emails me and says, hey, can you help me figure out what's going on? I do my best to share out of that experience. So I try not to just hoard that.
Yeah. Well, so now the least fair question I've been asking everyone, and I should really prepare everyone for it. So I'm a white dude,
mm-hmm.
and I think one question when it comes to issues of people of color or sort of structural racism on broadly, but also the very specific of how to let Noel just be Noel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the questions can all be boiled down to how can I help make it better?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a burden there.
Yeah.
It's I'm asking somebody who's dealing with this issue because they can't not how to help you make it better. Another layer of burdening to that. And yet still I ask, what do you tell the people who want to be more engaged, who want to help make changes to this sort of long, slowly built imbalance built around the social construct of race?
I would say that, changing society begins with, changing ourselves. And so I think that, to really be an effective change agent requires some inner work, some introspection, some understanding of what it means to be white, and to really dig in and unpack that, right? And not to do the just stop at sort of the white guilt thing, but to try to see the world, right, that as minorities, right, racial, whatever your minority group is your designation, designations within society, our society, to get to the point where you can kind of see the world as it is, and the world, and it's sort of a flip of the script, right? So it's having a broader awareness that this is who I am and this is what it means to be white in America, and then to say, but this is how America should be, right? And this is how our reality, our values, as Americans don't stack up with the reality, right? We're falling short, right? Mm-hmm. And so, until I think that and that begins with seeing how privilege is manifest in your life, and seeing how, and really understanding your own story, and your own sense of self, and that may mean doing some family history stuff. right? And understanding, how your family came to be white, because, a lot of, folks were a mosaic and a melting pot, both at the same time. I don't think we're either or, right? So it's like your folks came from somewhere, right, and became a part of this thing that's called America, and your family became a part of this thing that's called whiteness. So embrace that, understand that. And if you go on that journey, I think that the incredibly powerful and liberating thing about that journey is you will have a stronger and better sense of self, of who you are, beyond who both good, bad, and ugly society tells you who you are. And so it's a journey of personal discovery, right? And that hopefully leads to a place of hunger and drive, right, and groundedness in the push for societal change. Because when the work gets really hard, it becomes really easy. And this comes from all of us who have some place of privilege, whether it's economic privilege or racial privilege or education. It becomes really easy to try to retreat back to what we know, right? And to get back to the safety of, well, you know what, like I can selectively engage because I'm white and I don't have to do that work, right? Or I'm really highly educated and I know how to code switch and I know, right? So I don't have to do, right? So and the thing is that there's no real true escape, right? It's really all we're doing is burying our heads in the sand. And we increasingly live in a time where, for a lot of white folks, the times are, and sort of the decision is choosing them to say, you know what, we got to grapple with this, as opposed to that selective engagement, like, oh yeah, I'm going to lean in today, and right, because, it's the right thing to do. And it's like, no, you have to see, you really, really, really believe where your, I can't do short answers, where your personal, where your personal well-being is wrapped up in the change. Because if it comes from a place of charity or benevolence or moral obligation, right, like that's when the going gets tough, that gets easy to let go of. But when it's like, no, my very survival is tied up in this, the survival of my kids is tied up in this, then you kind of act a different way. Like, humans are programmed to act a different way, right, when we reach that headspace.
Yeah, that's profound. I don't know if you're trying to be profound, but it's a good answer.
These are the things that bounce around in my head. I'm just letting them out.
Well, no, where would you send people to if they wanted to connect with you? Like, what's the best way to go about that?
Active on Facebook and Twitter. So Facebook would be, I guess, facebook.com/Noel Nix. At Twitter, I'm just at Noel Nix.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me.
Thanks for the invite.
So that was my conversation with Noel Nix. I can't say enough about what it means that Noel spent the time and shared so openly about some really personal things. So a big thank you to Noel. I hope you will reach out to Noel and connect with him if you connected with the stories that he shared. He's just a wonderful person, and I'm really glad to share a community with him. I also want to say thank you to Rashawn, Patrick, and Taj for their voicemails. I really loved hearing from them and hearing those perspectives. If you would like to leave comments, share a story of your own, or any other kind of feedback, the voicemail is 612-361-9261. And if you do leave enough feedback from this episode, I'd love to put together a response episode for episode 5 from voicemails. So if you have the time. I want to say the theme song for Not About You is Rebels of Our Own Kind by Minneapolis musician Charlie Van Stee. If you have other folks I can connect with, I'm always looking to connect with more organizers, activists, leaders, educators, thinkers, artists. You can reach out to me on social media. The podcast hashtag is NAYPOD, NAPOD. You can find Not About You Pod on Twitter at Not About You Pod. You can find me on Twitter at ThatLevi. I'd love to find more people to connect with for maybe future episodes and in general. And if you can share the show, that would be great. Again, the voicemail, 612-361-9261. Thank you for listening. This has been Not About You.